I'm Luisa, a 25-year-old housewife. I grew up in a poor, lower-class family. But what we lacked in money and material things, we more than made up for it in love. We were very close-knit. My father supported the family as a local mechanic who oftentimes received his pay by other poor people who bartered. So, sometimes instead of money, he'd receive vegetables or a meat from an animal that was recently slaughtered by one of the local farmers in the area. My mother, she was a typical housewife who took care of the needs of her family. And though we didn't grow up with much, she made sure we wanted for nothing outside what was provided by my father. What we had was always clean and well taken care of, so we were content. I had an older brother George who was married and starting a family by the time I reached middle school, and an older sister, Angie, who quickly followed suit. I was the baby of the family, younger by about 10 years. So, in my formidable teenage years, I was essentially an only child. In my family, to have your child grow up and start their own family was considered a success. Because of our economic status, going to college was out of the question. You were either a farmer, a skilled laborer, or a housewife. But as I was growing up, I wanted more. And though I didn't have the academic skill to garner a scholarship and go to college, nor did I have the finances to support it, best option was to pick up a hobby that would pay well in the future. I chose photography. One evening, during dinner, I informed my parents of my future plans. I didn't want to follow in the footsteps of my brother and sister and become a wife and mother right out of high school. I wanted a career, something that I could do to become more independent. This concept was foreign to my parents though. It took a while to convince them. But one day my father came home with a camera. One of his customers didn't have the money to pay for a job he had done for him in fixing one of his farm equipment, so he offered to pay him with something he could use from his second-hand store. Needless to say, I was elated when he presented it to me at dinner. My parents were proud when they could give us something we really wanted. Even if it was an old outdated camera that was on its last leg. Thankfully, my father was mechanically inclined and could fix almost anything. So he got it in working order and gave it to me as a birthday gift. I was 13 years old. By the time I graduated high school, I had snapped hundreds of pictures. And some made it in the local newspaper. I was practically famous in my little town for being able to capture events and occasions that was sometime only memorialized in your mind. Graduations, weddings, birthdays, hurricanes, mudslides, everything. My life changed when I met my husband, Jacob. He and I were much the same, in that we wanted more than what was expected from us from our families. We weren't satisfied with the status quo, and we didn't want any future children to be satisfied with that either. Instead, we wanted to build a legacy for them. Maybe a business or something like that. More than just barely scraping by from generation to generation. So, when we began dating, both families were pleased. Although it could be said he was a mama's boy, I didn't necessarily see that as a negative. After all, if a man loves his mother, how bad could that be, right? Well, I couldn't be more wrong about that, though I didn't realize it at the time. After the wedding, Jacob and I found a small house in the center of our small town. It wasn't the best place to live, but it was all our meager income could afford at the time. So, it was our plan to work hard and save money towards something more conducive with raising a family. But for now, it was perfect for a young couple starting out. Unfortunately, where we decided to live was within walking distance from his parents' home. And before long, my mother-in-law would make a daily visit while my husband was at work. Jacob decided to go into business with his uncle right out of high school, and they opened a small restaurant in town. It wasn't great, but it was at least a steady stream of income we could depend on. I, on the other hand, decided on a career path that was a little less sure. I always had a creative streak and went from photography in middle school, but by the time I graduated high school, I wanted to become a writer. There was no real big money in it at the time, but it was enough for me to save a pretty good-sized nest egg. But I didn't tell anyone, including Jacob. I wanted to be able to surprise him one day when we were ready to buy our forever home. I counted the days when we would be able to move. My mother-in-law visited constantly and it was beginning to be a bit much. First she would say it was to help me, as a newlywed wife, to learn how to be a proper housewife. I didn't mind, though I had my own mother as an example, but out of respect I didn't squawk too much about it. Then it started becoming too intrusive and too much to bear. And when I would mention it to my husband, he would brush it off as if I was overreacting to his mother's act of kindness towards me. It started out as small, like snide or belittling remarks. Then it became more aggressive and combative between us. I never thought it would come to this when we first started dating, but by the end of it all, it was more than could be tolerated. "Honey, I think your mother is coming over too often. Can you please talk to her for me?" I would say. "Oh, don't mind her. She's just trying to be helpful," he'd say to me. But she wasn't being helpful in the least. And it was becoming more and more bothersome. And to be honest, it was frustrating trying to entertain her when I was supposed to be working. Which was something she and my husband got in their mind was just a useless hobby and a waste of time. Yet, I was making a pretty good income with my writing. I was becoming more skilled and began having more requests to feature them in magazines and newspapers. Before long, I was making quite a name for myself. Still, I was becoming quite popular. "What is all of this?" my mother-in-law asked one day when she popped up unannounced. Even though the house was clean and neat, I did have a lot of papers and old photographs laying around on the kitchen table I was using as a makeshift workstation. "I'm working, Mother. What can I help you with?" I tried not to sound exacerbated. But I had a deadline and not much time to deal with her nitpicking and insults today. "Working, huh? Humph. You call this work?" She started picking up my pictures. They had been the ones I saved from my days of being a photographer in my younger years. "What are you making, a scrapbook?" I gently took the photo from her hand and placed it back where she had taken it. "I'm writing a story and I use these old photos as inspiration." "You mean, more like an escape? While my poor Jacob is working hard and struggling trying to make ends meet, you're sitting here being a burden. Look at this place. You can't even be a proper housewife to ease his burden," she said. "That's not true at all. I do the housework and I help where I can," I tried to defend myself. What my mother-in-law didn't know was, although Jacob worked hard on the restaurant business, he barely cleared $500 a month. The rest of our living expenses were covered by me. And though it didn't look like it, I was beginning to bring in a pretty good income. At the moment, I was writing for a very popular novella that was being shot and aired at the moment. One thing she didn't know was, it was one she and my sisters-in-law often bragged about when we were together. If they took the time to read the credits, they would see my name prominently featured as one of the writers for the series. Another thing she didn't know was, I had already signed a contract for the next series to air when this one was finished. I had already started drafting the storyline and it was approved. But one day, when I was busy writing the finale of the current novella I was working on, my mother-in-law came in like a bull in a china shop. I just didn't have the time or patience to deal with her today. "This place is a mess," she started right from the door. "When I agreed to let you marry my Jacob, it was because I thought you would be a help to him. But you're nothing but a leech," she shouted. "What? What did you just call me?" This got my attention. "You heard me. You're nothing but a leech. When I talked to Jacob, he was so tired of it. He said you do nothing all day but spend all of his hard-earned money and you don't even cook for him when he gets home. You just sit here playing on your computer and wait for him to bring food home from his restaurant," she accused. "I don't cook, because he said I didn't need to, since he always have leftovers from the restaurant. But it's not because I'm being lazy. Given our current financial situation, it's just practical to put the food to use." I said this defending myself. "I can't believe he would say that to you." Before I realized what she was doing at the kitchen sink, she walked over to my makeshift workstation and poured an entire bucket of water all over my pictures and laptop. Immediately my laptop went black. "What the hell? Are you nuts?" I yelled. As I busied myself picking up the photos to save them from ruin, my mother-in-law grabbed my laptop and smashed it on the floor. I was shocked. My eyes and mouth flew wide open in horror as I saw the laptop I had worked hard to buy, smashed to smithereens. My Jacob told me he gives you $500 a month on living expenses and you blow it all on fancy things like laptops and developing these pictures. You can't cook and you don't clean. What good are you? You can't even have a baby, she yelled. What? I can have a baby. Jacob and I decided to wait until we were financially stable. I said. And exactly when is that supposed to happen if you're spending all of his hard-earned money on selfish things like this? Go and pack your things. I already talked to Jacob, so there's no need for you to go crying to him. He's already agreed. This is not a decision for you to make. This is between me and Jacob. We're husband and wife. This has nothing to do with you. Now please, go, I said. I never liked this haughty attitude of yours, my mother-in-law said. I never wanted you to marry my Jacob. You tricked him into believing you had ambitions and goals, and he convinced me you would be his perfect wife. I knew he made the wrong choice, but for his sake, I agreed. This time she was yelling so loudly I know our neighbors could hear it, but I didn't care at this point. She was so busy defending her precious son, she wasn't hearing a word I was saying. Anything I said fell on deaf ears. She went on talking loudly over me, ignoring anything I had to say. You're a disappointment to Jacob, but I know your type. His restaurant is struggling and you're sitting at home eating all of the profits on stupid gadgets like this. She picked up my USB drive from the floor and I snatched it from her hand before she could damage it. I'll talk it over with Jacob when he gets home, I said. She gave me an evil smirk when I said this. Don't think you're going to bewitch my son again with your lies. I already warned him about you. He will be staying with me until you leave this house. She shoved papers in my hands. It was divorce papers. He's already signed his part, you do the same. He wants a divorce. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. Jacob never voiced any of these concerns to me before. I knew he was a mama's boy, but it never crossed my mind he was bad-mouthing me to his mother and making it seem as though I was not contributing to our finances. I mean, he only gave $500 a month and that barely covered the rent. I paid everything else. We had only been married a little over a year. We had recently celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And though we had big plans for our future, I was the only one who took it seriously and was saving towards it. Jacob simply didn't make enough money to do so. But I never complained. I thought I was doing this for us and our family. I never looked at our circumstances and tried to blame him for his poor choice of opening a restaurant, knowing our citizenry couldn't afford such a luxury. I just supported his goal of becoming a world-renowned chef one day. I thought this was just the first step to realizing his dream. Just as I thought he was supporting my dream of wanting to become a famous writer. My tears blurred my vision as I filled out my portion of the divorce papers. Maybe my mother-in-law was right, there was no sense in trying to convince him anymore. When I handed her the divorce papers, she snatched them away and studied it for a moment, then said, "Don't take your time in leaving. Go back to your parents' house and leech off of them." She hummed as she folded the papers and walked out the door. Later that night, while I was packing my few belongings, Jacob came home with his mother. She yelled, "Why are you still here?" "As you can see, I'm still packing and I won't be able to leave until tomorrow," I said. I looked to Jacob, "Is this what you really want?" "Yes, my mother was right. I didn't see it myself, but you've been draining me since we got married. I can't keep funding your hobbies anymore. You tricked me into believing you wanted the same things as me, but you're just sucking the blood out of me. You don't need to talk to her anymore. You're already divorced. She's a stranger to us now," his mother cut in. "I've already turned in the papers myself so she wouldn't delay it." "Oh, don't worry. I would never do such a thing. I'm not going to lie, their words hurt. But I sucked it up and endured it." Tomorrow was another day. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper ran an article on the writers of the popular novella. Our photos were featured in the article. And that's when everyone in town knew what I had been doing in my spare time and what my hobby really entailed. I was a bona fide writer now with high accolades in the industry. It was also announced I would be the lead writer for the new upcoming novella now in the works. That's when my ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband made a visit to my parents' house. We were in the middle of celebrating my accomplishments when they knocked on the door. "We're here to see my darling daughter-in-law," I could hear my ex-mother-in-law say to my mother when she opened the door. "Don't you mean, ex-daughter-in-law?" my mother said snidely but sweetly. "Oh, we're family." "It was just a misunderstanding," my mother-in-law said as she pushed her way past my mother and barged into the house. My ex-husband was closely behind her with his head held down. "What's the meaning of this?" my father yelled. "We're in the middle of a celebration for my daughter. You're not invited." Jacob rushed over to me and took my hands in his. "Luisa, I'm begging you. Please forgive me. Please take me back. Jacob, we're divorced now. This is what you and your mother wanted. Remember." "I'm a blood-sucking leech," I said cavalierly. "You can't forget all of the horrible things you and your mother said to me, right?" I was mistaken. It's all my fault. I should have never listened to her. "She never liked you from the beginning, but I fought for our love," he said. "No, you didn't. You never fought for our love. You only listened to your mother and divorced me without so much as an explanation. You signed the papers. We're divorced now, we're strangers." With this, my mother-in-law came over to me and tried to take my hands in hers. I snatched my hand back. I did not want this evil woman to touch me. It was all my fault. It was a misunderstanding. "Please, come back to my son. His restaurant is in trouble." I didn't realize he had been operating in the red all this time. My brother finally explained to me that they have been barely scraping by. "I didn't know you were funding the restaurant. But Jacob knew, and still he allowed you to belittle and demean me. Because of his own pride, he let you think the worst of me when I was the one holding it down until we reached our goals in life. It was me." I yelled out. She pushed Jacob towards me and indicated for him to beg me. He did, just like the mama's boy he always was. "Please, take me back. I'll never do this again," he said. "No. I will never take you back. I was the one blinded by love. It was me who didn't realize that you were the bloodsucker, not me. I will never take you back," I said. Then my father pushed Jacob and his mother out the door and slammed it, saying, "And don't you ever show your face here again. You're not welcomed here." And with a few deep breaths to calm us down at the nerve of them showing up uninvited, we continued with the celebration as if nothing happened. As for Jacob and his uncle, the restaurant finally went bankrupt without the financial support from me. Eventually he had to move back to his parents' home and begin his job search. I hear he's a dishwasher in another restaurant. Maybe he'll be lucky and they'll let him work his way up to becoming a cook someday. It was a start. As for my ex-mother-in-law, she lost all of her bragging rights about her son being a famous chef in the area. But I hear she's now telling people her daughter-in-law is a famous writer. She always leaves out the part where I'm now her ex-daughter-in-law. In her mind, that's just semantics. So, her bragging continues. Finally, I was able to find a nice house for my parents, and they're happily retired and reaping the rewards of their last daughter, who they encouraged to pursue her passion and dreams by repairing an old worn camera. But I live in the city now. I managed to buy a nice apartment and spend my time writing one popular novella after another. I haven't taken the time to date since my failed marriage with Jacob. For now, I'm happy and content. I'll let the arrows of love fall where they may. I may even open up my heart to love again one day.
Thanks for listening to my story. Come back for more stories and help our channel grow. Bye.